everyone, I'm Rabbi Yossi Madvig, and welcome to the very first edition of Jews Did It First. I'm actually going to make this first episode an introduction to the podcast and give you a feel of who I am and what the purpose of the podcast is. And the second episode, which will hopefully be uploaded together with this one, will be the meat and potatoes, as it were, of the podcast. After that, God willing, they'll be published every Thursday. The main thrust of Jews Did It First is to shed light on a phenomenon that I've noticed over the course of the last, decade or so. Very often I come across something in Jewish literature that is clearly an antecedent of some modern day cultural or legal concept. And we'll look at a lot of different topics, such as ethical dictums, cultural icons, mythology, law, science, literature. I've seen many of the things that I'll bring up in the podcast mentioned before. I don't think that I'm the first one to see them, but I've always seen them isolated. One person recognized one thing, another person noticed another, etc. So much of what I'll be doing is just collecting, being a malakit, as it were. And some of the things I've never actually seen other people notice. So maybe they're my nuanced, reading of some historical record. But the reason I think that it's important is because it shows how critical Judaism has been to civilization, and will hopefully give those Jews listening a little pep in their step, so to speak, knowing that they are heirs to such a rich and beautiful and meaningful tradition. I would encourage you to learn more about this legacy that you've inherited and become a part of that story yourself. So first, a little background on myself. I'm not necessarily your average profile of a rabbi. I was raised as a pretty secular Jew. My parents sent me to Hebrew school. I was bar mitzvahed, celebrated some holidays, etc. But there wasn't an exceptionally strong emphasis on religion or religious practice at home. We're a pretty average American Jewish family. As I became more interested in religion, I became very involved in Christianity. I even enrolled in RCIA classes to be baptized and join the Catholic Church. At the behest of my parents, I spoke to a rabbi about my situation, and it was actually quite enlightening, and I heard from a side of Judaism that I never knew existed. After a lot of learning and soul-searching, I came to a crossroads. I just didn't know what to do. After speaking with the rabbi whom I'd become acquainted, as well as a priest that I admired, I came to the realization that I really needed divine assistance with this. So before Mass, one Sunday, I prayed privately in my mind to God for a sign, just something that would let me know in which direction I should go. Sure enough, just as I sat up in the pew, the woman sitting behind me in church started talking to her friend about the beautiful Shabbat service that she had attended the day before. Shabbat being the holy day of rest for the Jewish people. Something we did first, by the way, but we'll get to that in another episode. I was floored. This led to a chain of events which eventually brought me not just to where I was prior to my Christian experience, but to a state of wanting to keep Jewish law properly as an Orthodox Jew. I don't really like titles, Orthodox, Reform, whatever, but for lack of a better term. So therefore, after I finished college, I enrolled in a yeshiva, just like a Jewish university of sorts. Focuses on Talmud, Jewish law, and philosophy. And now here I am, I'm a rabbi at a college campus in upstate New York, starting a podcast. So now that you know a little bit about my background, let's get on with what this show is about. So there'll be two basic segments of the podcast, really three, but two main ones. The first and primary segment will be Jews Did It First, which I've already explained. The second will be counter-missionary claims. And I thought long and hard about whether to make this second section its own podcast, because I didn't want to alienate the Christian listeners, which I assume there are some. And the reasons I decided to keep it here are, one, I think it's very important that Jews know how to respond to missionary claims. Many groups spend a lot of time and money trying to convert Jews to Christianity, and it's becoming an increasing problem among what we'll call low information Jews, just like I was. Two, I also believe that it's important for Christians to know more about their arguments and the counterclaims. And very often, the only information Christians who missionize to Jews have about the faith that they're trying to disprove is some straw man arguments which they're prepared to take down. Rarely do they hear the counterclaim straight from the horse's mouth. And this will hopefully strengthen their respect for why Jews believe what we believe, and not just seeing us as some backwater yokels who've just never heard the good news, as it were. By the way, Jews did Christianity first as well, but that's for another episode. Now, I want to make something very clear. Two things, actually. One, this is not intended to be a slap at the Christian community as a whole. It's more directed towards those who fervently and enthusiastically try to lead Jews away from their faith and heritage, especially Jews who know very little about Judaism or the Jewish scriptures. Now, while these efforts continue, the majority of Christians show tremendous love and respect for the Jewish people, and I appreciate that very much. In fact, for a few years, I learned with and taught the Hebrew text to a few local pastors. It was very enlightening for all of us. There was mutual respect. No one tried to convert anyone. It was great. That's number one. Number two, and this is directed primarily at the Jewish listeners, which is probably the majority, though I could be wrong. This is not intended to make you a professional or an expert counter missionary. Please, if at all possible, if you encounter a friend or a classmate or coworker, or even, God forbid, a family member who tries to help you become a completed Jew or a biblical Jew or tell you the good news of Yeshua, just tell them, look, no thanks. I respect your religious beliefs. Please respect mine. End of conversation. If they can't handle that, then they're probably not really your friend. If it's a classmate, you should just find a new seat. And if it's a coworker, tell your boss, because that's ridiculous. If it's family, it's a little bit different. We'll get to that in a second. Regardless, this is for when you're backed into a corner, so to speak, and you don't have a viable way out of the conversation without being terribly rude or hurtful. Or maybe you found the one honest person who's sincerely curious as to why the Jews just don't believe in Jesus, gosh darn it. Because, I don't know, they've never met a Jew, or they couldn't quite figure out how that newfangled Google thing works, I don't know. But if you have a close Jewish friend or family member who was unfortunately already fallen victim to missionaries, don't think that because you listen to my podcast, you're going to just show them the light and they'll come running back to Judaism. As someone who's been through this process, I can tell you, there are many factors that can influence people to become Christian. In fact, while they may tell you that they became Christian based on this text or that proof, these are usually secondary reasons. And many times it's an emotional response. And the bulk of what you can do in that situation is just be a good friend and set a good example of how a Jew has a personal, loving relationship with God. And if that's not how you view your relationship with God, then maybe you're just not the right person to handle this situation. Yet. The best thing to do is to direct them to a professional. And there's some amazing resources such as Jews for Judaism, great organization, Outreach Judaism, and I'll be relying on some of these groups' works in my podcast. If you live near New York City, Los Angeles, Toronto, Sydney, that's in Australia, then your best bet is to look up those people and ask them how to proceed in getting your friend or your family member to speak with them or to engage and bring them back into the fold, as it were. If you live near me in upstate New York, I'd be happy to help and talk if you'd like. So where can you reach me? You can find me on Facebook, the Facebook page, Jews Did It First. I'm also on Twitter at Oswego Rabbi. That's O, S as in Sam, W, E, G as in George, O, Rabbi. Or you can email me at rabbi@jewishoswego.org. And the last and final segment will be a short Devar Torah, a thought on the weekly Torah portion that Jews read every week. And this will give you a little holiness to take into Shabbat and perhaps something to share with friends and family. Well, that's it for the introductions. Hope you listen to the first episode and find it interesting and inspiring. Stay tuned for more, and as I said, feel free to drop me a line and let me know you're listening and enjoying the show.
Countless are your praise, you are the power that saves. Some days I take hours to pray, but even if my tongue was sweet and lips graceful, I would still be unable to praise you. I'm grateful, I promise to be loyal and faithful. I'll represent you, I won't disgrace you.